Hello, folks, and welcome to the Non-Diet Yogi podcast. This is episode 21, Cognitive Inoculation and Aromatherapy During the Pandemic with Salvatore Battaglia. Whether you're a holistic health practitioner, a natural therapist, yoga teacher, or just somebody who is trying to navigate this pandemic with compassion and discernment, you're going to get a lot out of this episode. I'm your host, Casey Conroy, non-diet dietitian, naturopath in training, and yoga teacher. This episode has been a long time coming. Salvatore, or Sal as he likes to be called, is someone who I've wanted to interview for a long time. The thing I must say that I love about naturopathic medicine is that on the one hand, it draws upon these traditional wisdom philosophies. We've got traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, Siddha medicine, and yoga. And some of these systems rely quite heavily on the use of energy-based practices. And although I have a lived and sensed experience of things like chakras and energetic medicine, I'm not yet aware of a mountain load of evidence that supports this, at least to the satisfaction of my critical scientific mind. And I can see the potential for this to change, and that it is starting to change. Studies are beginning to come out that lend more credibility to these systems and practices. As Sal says, we're at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to integrating both energetic kind of wisdom philosophies with modern scientific understanding. And so we have this evolving modern scientific understanding that is both bringing new insights forward and sometimes providing an explanation for things that were known to the ancient Chinese or Indians through their medicine systems many thousands of years ago. And, we have this critical analysis, which is becoming increasingly necessary as a seventh principle of naturopathy. So Sal is one of those people who really comfortably holds both these aspects of natural medicine, the traditional roots and the scientific side of natural medicine. And he really sees them as different ways of describing the same thing. That's the impression I got from him. Sal is the owner of Perfect Potion, which was one of my first introductions to the world of aromatherapy. I remember wandering into the West End shop in Brisbane, nearly 20 years ago as a wide-eyed hippie uni bum studying vet science. And now, 20 years later, I'm still studying. I'm studying naturopathy now. And Sal's textbook, The Complete Guide to Aromatherapy, is crucial reading in our herbal medicine curriculum. I love aromatherapy and I love essential oils. I've got some in a diffuser right now as I'm recording this. I diffuse them while I'm studying, while I'm working, when I have clients, when I'm working with people. I use them daily. But anyone who has been following my work or this podcast for a while will probably know my feelings about aromatherapy have been a little bit muddied by, I'm just going to say it, essential oil multi-level marketing companies, which often have questionable safety, sustainability, and ethics practices. My pet peeve is probably the indiscriminate ingestion of essential oils, the negative side effects of which I see in practice at times, and which it's a topic that is so important. I'll be releasing a bonus episode about it, probably 2 weeks after this episode. That bonus episode will be available to Patreon subscribers, and you can access it along with all of my other bonus episodes, plus a growing library of goodies, including PDF guidebooks, audios, meditations, herbal giveaways, full yoga class videos, and all other kinds of guest offerings from as little as $2 US or $3 Australian per month. I could have spoken with Sal for hours. He is a natural teacher and his wonder and enthusiasm are truly infectious. I think I was probably on a high for about 5 days after talking to Sal. It was quite incredible, actually. Speaking with him really sparked this kind of synthesizing force inside me that helped me to pull together a lot of kind of thought forms that had been floating around in my head for weeks before that. And I was left feeling really uplifted and very grateful for this heartfelt interaction. In this episode, Sal and I talked about his journey from electrical engineering to aromatherapy and how martial arts brought him to Chinese medicine and acupuncture. We talk about how Perfect Potion started as a side hustle before the age of social media, how Sal integrates traditional wisdom philosophies with scientific understanding, and the problem with attempting to understand something like acupuncture from within a scientific paradigm, how both neurobiology and neurotheology give us a better understanding of how aromatherapy affects us at a subtle level, our role as holistic health practitioners during this pandemic, and dismantling the myth that holistic practitioners are all against vaccination. We talk about breaking down the mistrust that stops people from getting vaccinated, how we as practitioners can provide cognitive inoculation against COVID mis and disinformation, all while staying compassionate and open-minded and client-centered. We discuss the psychological and spiritual aspects of healing. We talk about vaccine mandates versus taking the time to invite people into a conversation about this stuff. We discuss MLM essential oil company claims in regards to COVID. We discuss aromatherapy, anosmia, and COVID-19, the misappropriation of indigenous knowledge and shamanic practices within the holistic health and yoga worlds, Jung, Freud, and holistic spirituality, and lessons from Julian of Norwich, a 14th century female mystic who lived during a pandemic. So we talked about a lot of stuff. And this episode was recorded during the floods that have recently racked the eastern coast of Australia. So I really hope that those affected by those floods and storms are rebuilding and putting their lives back together, and just want to take my hat off to all those folks helping these communities in ways big and small. You guys are absolute legends. So a short bio. Salvatore Battaglia has been passionate about natural therapies for most of his life. He holds qualifications in herbal medicine, acupuncture, and aromatherapy. Sal's dedication to aromatherapy has seen him hold positions in professional associations and government committees to ensure that the educational standards of professional aromatherapy are maintained and improved. Sal has been teaching aromatherapy since 1988. He is often called upon to speak at international conferences about aromatherapy, running a holistic and ethical business, and what it means to go natural and organic. Author of the Complete Guide to Aromatherapy Volume 1, Foundations and Materia Medica. This book is internationally acclaimed as the most comprehensive textbook on aromatherapy, and it has now been translated into Japanese and Korean. Since then, Sal has also released the Complete Guide to Aromatherapy Volume 3, Psyche and Subtle, The Aromatry, and Aromatherapy and Chakras, which is a beautiful book, might I add. The very last thing before we dive in, if you love this podcast, please subscribe and or leave a rating and review on Apple iTunes. To do so is really, really easy. From the show page, you just scroll down until you see the rating and review section with the 5 stars. And as I mentioned before, for even more love, you can become a Patreon of the podcast for just $3 Australian a month and receive non-diet yogi bonus episodes in addition to so much other good stuff. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Sal. Hello, Sal, and welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And so thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here and have the opportunity to have just a wonderful chat about things that we are all passionate about.
Oh, yes, me too. I cannot wait. So, Sal, could you please tell us, just in a couple of minutes or so, a bit more about yourself? What brought you to aromatherapy?
Now you've just changed your line there.
I did.
We
We've
had to, we
recorded
had,
this one.
we had
Sorry.
to, we had to restart this recording. And when she found out that, oh, Cassie, really, I could end up taking a whole hour or a whole day to explain my journey, as with so many other people. So I thought that was very cheeky of you to say in a couple of minutes. So look, let me start off by saying I always been fascinated by natural therapies and natural healing. In my, I will call it my past life, and that's my life before I discovered natural therapies. I had a science engineering background. And in the very early 80s, it was in 1982, my first job, it was in Tasmania. At that stage, I still had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew that the engineering science background job that I had was not for me. So I knew that I wanted to change. I knew that it would involve something to do with teaching because I love teaching. I just love to have an audience, whether they were children, adults. I just love sharing what it was that I was passionate about. But I actually discovered a very interesting homeopath, naturopath. And he was running workshops. This is back in 1983. So natural therapies back then was called alternative therapies. It wasn't called integrative medicine or natural medicine or anything like this. It was alternative therapies, and it was way out there. Aromatherapy wasn't even around in these days. You know, people were selling like synthetic fragrance oils and calling them essential oils back then. But I discovered herbal medicine. I discovered homeopathy, and I was drawn to it, and I knew this is what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to help people. I was, and I often don't tell this story, I was heavily involved in those days in martial arts.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that connection with martial arts also, I don't often tell this story, that connection with martial arts made I was fascinated with traditional Chinese medicine. I was jumping and skipping from kung fu classes to karate classes to taekwondo classes to aikido classes, you name it, I was doing it. So I actually had this connection with traditional Chinese medicine. So in those early days, while I was in Tasmania, I am from Queensland originally. I'm based in Brisbane now. My family is in Brisbane, but we're originally from far north Queensland. I was studying at a school, and that back then they were pioneers in distance education, and they had to put you in contact with a local naturopath who would become your mentor and tutor. And Jan was like my local mentor and tutor. And this was a college which I don't think exists. It was called the Queensland Institute of Natural Science, and it was at Mapleton. And I did my herbal medicine course. I did my naturopathy all through the Queensland Institute of Natural Science. But I was still drawn to Chinese medicine. I knew that I had to come back to Queensland, and I knew that I had to study face-to-face. And I found the original name was Acupuncture Colleges of Australia, by the way, which then became the Australian College of Natural Medicine, which then became Endeavour College. So I studied at the Australian College. Well, back then it was still the Australian Colleges of Acupuncture, I think. And I studied Chinese medicine, and I felt, oh my God, this is amazing. I totally related to all the philosophies and foundations of Chinese medicine. I got in trouble so often because I felt that the best way to learn, I always wanted to connect with the elders in the industry. So I found an incredible Chinese acupuncturist in the suburb where I was living. I approached him, and he was more than happy just for me to come in on Saturday afternoons and chat to him about Chinese medicine philosophy. He was happy. And I was still in my year one. He was happy because we didn't learn needle skills until almost the end of second year. But here, Joe said, here, Sal, here's some needles. Now, you're not going to practice on me, but you're going to start practicing on oranges and something and whatever. And so I was practicing all these needle skills even before we had started. So I was always getting in trouble at college for wanting to do things, because I was so eager to learn. And that ended up being the case with aromatherapy. I remember teaching my first aromatherapy course, and I knew nothing about it because this is way back in 1984. And so I actually thought, maybe I need to learn something about essential oils. Look, I had read, there was only about 2 or 3 books available on aromatherapy at that stage, but something drew me to aromatherapy, which fascinated me. And I think we're still at the tip of the iceberg in understanding how it works. I slowly, by the time I graduated and I was working at that stage, I had a little practice underneath my parents' house, and my heritage is Italian. And so with, your practice in those days, we didn't have any social media. There was no internet. It's all word of mouth. And so with word of mouth, my practice started to grow and become quite busy. But then as I discovered aromatherapy, I felt, well, I started to make interesting blends. I started to make balms for aches and pains. And then people started to go, oh, wow, my friend told me about this beautiful balm and it helped to ease their arthritis. Can I have some of that as well, please? And then I realized, hey, maybe there is something in this aromatherapy that I really need to explore. So I was looking at aromatherapy from an opportunity to create what I call a passive income while I was growing my practice. But at the same time, I became more interested. I eventually ended up, and I think you can see one of my diplomas there. I went to England to study with the very well internationally renowned Madame Michelin Arcia. I studied aromatherapy there. And from there, nowadays I integrate my love of natural therapies with my love of acupuncture and Chinese medicine with aromatherapy. I will make a disclaimer. I'm also the owner of Perfect Potion, which we created at the same time that part of this journey. I hope that's a very short
That's
explanation
great.
of my journey.
It's fantastic. And it beautifully segues into one of the questions I was going to ask you anyway, Sal, which relates to, your integration of aromatherapy with not only Chinese medicine, but also you've written a bit on the chakras as well and taught about that. And as a yoga teacher, yes, that's the book. For those who are just listening, Sal's just held up his aromatherapy in the chakras book, which is a beautiful book. And so I'm just wondering, how do we, as practitioners, so I'm a nutritionist yoga teacher, been studying my naturopathy degree, but this is asking for anyone who's a holistic health practitioner. How do we apply, say, some of these more traditional wisdom philosophies at the same time as integrating the modern scientific understanding that we have today? How do we bring them together and have, say, the science without losing touch with those traditional roots and vice versa?
One question just became 3 questions.
Sorry, I have a
Okay.
tendency to do that.
Yeah, and look, and that's very, very exciting. And I think we need to break down what you said. And to start off with the first question, look, I don't think we are there yet in being able to. And look, for me now, I get to travel now quite a bit, and I can see where in other parts of the world. Will I use, look, let's not get caught up in names, but if I use the word complementary therapies or holistic therapies, I think really it belongs to what I call holistic modality. And what I want to say is we're not there yet, because I see in other countries where things like aromatherapy, things like traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, have become integrated within a more mainstream health system to become true integrative medical practices. I see that even in Japan. I see that in Korea. Now, there is always a risk when something like that happens, because the risk is that we try to understand the holistic modality, whether it be herbal medicine, whether it be aromatherapy, whether it be acupuncture. We try to understand it and interpret it within the scientific framework that is present at the moment. That is dangerous because, and I mentioned this at an integrative medicine conference in Japan once. I was quite actually nervous when I was saying this, because here I was in front of a group of doctors and health practitioners, nurses, and they were kind of saying, what you are practicing now is not true integrative medicine. And they looked at me, but I'm a doctor and I use acupuncture in my practice. But you attempt to understand acupuncture from within your scientific paradigm. That's not integrative medicine, because you are missing out on a very important aspect of Chinese medicine, understanding the connection between the 5 elements, for example, the connection and understanding of the qi and the different types of qi, and understanding the organ systems according to Chinese medicine, not according to Western medicine. And then they was looking at me quite, bemused. And so I remember at one stage, I sat in front of a group of several hundred people, and I could tell that, look, this is in Japan. I said, but you guys are all Asian. You should understand this. And then qi, the concept of qi, and so, and then I went, so, and then you could see this buzz in the room. And then I was able to talk about aspects of qi. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that science is so important. And we need to be able to integrate, we need to explore and develop, have a greater understanding of our practice through science. But at the same time, we should never lose touch with the traditional skills, the traditional art of that practice, because I think the philosophy that underpins, whether it be, as we're talking about, Chinese medicine, whether it be herbal medicine, we can see it being lost. Nowadays we are looking at herbal extracts, which are standardized. What is the main active constituents? We see that also in aromatherapy. And I don't know, I've had this discussion with even like the TGA legislators, when they once said to me, well, hold on, your eucalyptus oil doesn't fall within the actual British Pharmacopoeia standard, which has a standard of 80% or more seniol. But I said, so what you want me to sell is a rectified or a chemically adulterated essential oil. You don't care if it is naturally distilled and extracted and has not been rectified in any way, because there are many eucalyptus oils that don't meet that standard. So look, it's always that matter of finding a balance. When I wrote The Psyche and the Subtle, which really much more explores the spiritual dimension of scent, it's not that I got in trouble, but some people were critical and saying, why did you want to try to explore that spiritual connection with scent through science? But I said, it's not just science, it's also, it's incorporating it with it's incorporating it with philosophy, for example. It is incorporating it with spiritual practices as well. And I like the term, and for new, and the term, for example, that I think is much more appropriate in helping us, for example, to understand this spiritual connection that we often have with scent, is the term that I use is now, it's instead of just using what we call neurobiology, and neurobiology is important because that is helping us to understand how essential oils really have such a profound effect on our psyche and on our brain, and how we work. But that it's, I'm just like, hold on, I want to tell you what that term is, neurotheology. And it's kind of like a more recent term, which looks at science, it looks at theology, it looks at psychology, it looks at the myths that we have been passed on and the traditional practices, and how it gives us a better understanding of how scent works at a more subtle spiritual level. Now, I've jumped the gun, focusing on a topic that I am very, very familiar with. Andrew Newberg is like, he was like the coined the word, and I think it's just a fantastic word, which kind of says we need a more holistic approach to science, but at the same time, we need to be very careful because science can sometimes be misrepresented. And we've seen that, for example, during the pandemic, which I'm sure we will
Absolutely.
talk about
Oh
at
my
some stage.
gosh. Well, you've just conveniently led me into the next question, Sal. So thank you so much for that. And that is that, well, let me start with this. You wrote a fantastic article on your blog about what you see as our role as holistic health practitioners during this pandemic, particularly in reducing vaccine hesitancy. And in it, you referred
Yeah.
to Susan Arentz's editorial. I think
Yes,
that's how you
because
say
that
her
was a
name.
wonderful article.
It
That
was
was, I think, in, yeah.
awesome. It was
You
so,
read that article,
oh yes,
Kathy?
I
Yeah,
was so
yeah,
relieved and
yeah.
encouraged to read that, because actually, at least where I live in a permaculture eco village in Crystal Waters, Sunshine Coast hinterlands, and where I live, there is a considerable level of vaccine
Mm,
hesitancy. And yes, there is much conspiracy theory and
mm,
misinformation in circulation. And just a quick side story, when I came out, in air quotes, in my community as someone who supports COVID vaccination, a few
yeah,
people really expressed their shock and dismay at
yes.
my so-called kind of hypocrisy. And their
Mm,
viewpoint was, how can you say that you're passionate about natural health and yet support this vaccine? So my
yeah,
question to you,
yeah,
Sal, is,
yes,
have you
yeah,
experienced this attitude in the wellness community? And, how do we get here if you have?
yes, yeah. Look, I I've had similar experiences, Cassie, as you, because when I spoke out about it, some people were kind of almost surprised and shocked, and said the same thing. Well, aren't you like one of the leading experts in aromatherapy? Why do you feel that you need to get vaccinated, for example? Um, we could, so first of all, there's two questions there.
Yeah.
First of all, we have an important role within the community. Sadly, as naturopaths, as holistic healers, but unfortunately, there still isn't that professional recognition across the board with other health practitioners such as doctors and so on. I think unless that can occur, it's always going to be a challenge for us. We'll be on the sideline of whole the healthcare establishment, and we need to become more integrated. Now, that needs to start at perhaps the professional association level. We need not be fearful of being like taken over, of corporate takeovers or whatever within the industry, because I do think that unless it's more of an integrative approach, and this is what people have failed to understand, and this is why I love continually using the word integrative medicine rather than say complementary medicine, because it means that it's a different choice. I think we can need to work together. I got vaccinated, but of course, what was I doing every day? I was take my echinacea. I would I would use my essential oils on a daily basis. So there's nothing wrong with doing that. I found it's a gorgeous, and look, it really comes about by not understanding how the body works, for example. And I really think that perhaps even within natural medicine courses, there needs to be even more emphasis in understanding how this incredible, beautiful body of ours works, how the immune system works, for example. And I'm sorry to say, let's look at it purely from a principle point of view without not getting caught up in technicalities. Vaccination is actually one of the more holistic approaches to encouraging your immune system, for the acquired immune system, to develop its own antibodies to protect you against the virus, against a contagion. Look, there has been, of course, and then if we have a look at the problem is that the pharmaceutical companies really haven't done a good job in the past. So we can understand why there is vaccine hesitancy.
Absolutely.
We can understand that there is a mistrust of the pharmaceuticals. There's been a mistrust of the government. Of course, it's been perpetuated even further now with the fact that we are so well connected. But back in Jenner's time, and Jenner was one of the first ones to develop vaccinations for smallpox, and he saved millions of people's lives by the time that was developed. The fact is, it does save so many lives. But in those days, the vaccines, the way that, farmers, the big pharma took over at some stage, taking control. And that only happened, do you know that really only, it's a recent phenomenon when big pharma took over. It was only in the 30s and 40s. Before then, it was all this, it was like more compounding pharmacists, it was apothecaries and so on that were responsible for developing the drugs. So of course there has been a lot of mistrust, but we need to break down those mistrust and realize that sometimes, I'm not saying all the time because I'm sorry, I don't even want to go into politics, but we have such a mistrust of our politicians. Look at them, they're fools, most of them. So why would you trust somebody when they say that we should be getting out there and getting vaccinated? So you can understand that, especially in a lot of Western countries, the individual's rights are far more important than the rights as a community. And I think we've lost some of that in the over COVID. I hope in one way the floods that we have experienced here has reconnected community again, because I maintain my relationship with those few friends that I had that weren't vaccinated. I actually convinced some family members that were very strongly against getting vaccinated to get vaccinated, and especially because they were elderly. And I'm so grateful that they did, and they are fine and they are okay. Yeah. So look, it's been a big challenge. And I do think that, first of all, we as a professional our professional bodies, and I think across the board, especially in natural medicine and acupuncture, have been working very hard with with governments to gain more professional recognition. It has to start there. And then I feel that no matter what modality you practice, you really need to have that good understanding of the body and how it works. And just tell me, I didn't bring that book. I found a book and it was beautifully written about the immune system. It was beautifully illustrated. And I thought back to my martial arts days. And the author gives this example of, like, should you get vaccinated or not get vaccinated? And of course, I can understand, well, why shouldn't my immune system protect me? And of course you will, if you are not vulnerable to and already have predisposing conditions. And look, I'll be honest, I can understand why some younger people probably didn't feel the need to get vaccinated. But I've got parents, for example, that I'm trying to keep out of an aged care facility. The last thing I wanted to see them do is end up in an aged care facility, because that's where you would be most exposed. Now, if I wasn't vaccinated, then I would be taking great risk with my parents, who are now in their late 80s, with all the comorbidities that they have, from Parkinson's disease to hypertension to cardiovascular disease. I would be taking a great risk if I would come to visit them, as I have been doing regularly. So I felt that there was a social responsibility as well for getting vaccinated. What was I going to talk about? Oh, yeah, this example about the immune system. So he says, look, you've got an option. Like now, and he used, now, for example, if you're in a dojo and you wanted to teach your students, the art of kendo or something like that with swords. Now, you could go out there and you could give them like real swords, and then they could go for go for it. And one or two of them, they'll develop their skills, but one or two of them might get hurt. One or two of them might get really hurt badly, or you might even have like an accidental death. But if you were to use, say, rubber swords or something, and they were practicing, it's less likely. So he was trying to use that. He said, you're developing these skills through, and I said, I felt that it wasn't the best example, but I see, okay, you could take a risk with the real virus, or why not take a risk with a vaccine, which may contain, and of course they're using new science. People have always been hesitant about new technology. With the mRNA vaccination, it is new technology. They didn't just start working on it last week or 2 years ago. They had been working on this for over 20 years. And so it's exciting now that we're likely to see in the future that vaccines will be able to be made more readily available. Now, but once again, we need to break down that mistrust. And I think it's understanding why people have that mistrust and slowly breaking down those barriers, and then helping them to see what the benefits and the safety factors are, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. That mistrust is such a mistrust in government, in big pharma, in the medical community, or mainstream medical community. At least that's what I see in my yoga and wellness communities. How do you think, Sal, we can remain really client-centered and compassionate? Because that compassion piece comes back to, the public health benefit of vaccination, of course, and prioritizing the well-being of our community over that of the individual. But how can we stay client-centered, compassionate, and really understanding for our clients whilst providing what you referred to in one of your blogs as cognitive inoculation against all the disinformation? How do we do that? Big question, sorry.
Okay, well, I like the way you throw in several questions in one. Like the first one is, how do we maintain that compassion and trust? Look, one of the things, and this is why I felt the catalyst for writing a section on the more subtle aspects of aromatherapy, which I call the psyche and the subtle. And look, I don't know why I did this, and maybe it was a mistake. I want to say, look, not everybody is going to be interested in what is more the subtle and the psyche effects of the essential oils. But let me read, and here I'm quoting, because all I feel that I often do when I write is I am able, I'm a collector of information and you have to be able to scrutinize that information and put it together to present it in a way that I can support my argument. And so the section here is called Loss of Soul. So I'm only answering the first part of your question. Tacey, the author of Gods and Disease, Making Sense of Our Physical and Mental Well-Being, explains most of our medical practitioners, and in this sense, I'll be upfront and say perhaps some of, especially the way in which complementary therapies is going. If you study herbal medicine, if you study nutrition, you said you study nutrition, for example. I hope you do nutrition. I hope it's a more holistic nutrition that looks at the food rather than looking at supplementations.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
actually, in my practice, I look more at psychology now because I specialize in disordered eating and eating disorders. So,
Okay. So
yeah.
exactly. So this is, you're going to like what Tacey has to say then. Tacey explains most of our medical practitioners are trained in the biopsychosocial model. Okay, so we take into account the social aspects, we take into account the psychological aspects, but are not able to identify the more subtle factors and the spiritual elements that can trigger diseases in the body. Now, I think that's very important. So how do we remain compassionate within our practice, and how do we remain, keep that connection? Further on, Tacey says, the medical profession is often preoccupied tracing disease to the chemical imbalances and physical causes. However, he suggests the archetypal approach interprets illness as a statement about what has failed to happen in that realm, what has failed within the realm of the spirit. So I think that as holistic therapists, we've got the best of both worlds, of the science and of having an awareness of this innate connection. When you say that you cook, a lot of what you do with nutrition is psychologically based, it's spiritually based, which led me, and I hope that we can finish off talking about Julian of Norwich, for example,
Sure.
because there's a very strong spiritual connection. That spiritual connection affects our mental well-being, which then affects our physical well-being. So disease, remember, take the title of Tacey's book is Making Sense, Gods and Disease, Making Sense of Our Physical and Mental Well-being. Now, of course, he talks about how over time, the Western world in particularly has become disenfranchised, not just with Western medicine, but with Western spiritualities, with the traditional Christian faiths, for example, of whatever background. Now, and that got me interested, and this is why nowadays people, we're fascinated with other spiritual cosmologies, with indigenous cosmologies, indigenous practices. And what a lot of these indigenous cosmologies have, a lot of these practices have, that is lacking, that is actually lacking within traditional Christian cosmologies, is that deep connection with nature.
Yes.
And for those of us who's taken that path to study more holistic practice, we understand that. Now, when it comes, why do we need to separate science from an understanding of nature? Because see, when vaccines became the whole process of vaccination, it saves lives. We need to understand that irrespective of the state of your health. And this is, we could get into another argument and a discussion about this, and we might need to, because I'm going to start writing about this more, be more prolific about writing about this. Is it the terrain, or is it the germ theory? So what are we to believe? And you understand the term, the terrain is, well, if my body is strong and healthy, the virus is not going to affect me. Now, there were some absurd theories that came out from scientists at the beginning of the pandemic, where wearing masks, for example, would actually activate the viruses which were already in you.
Oh, yeah, not true.
Oh, God. And that came from somebody who had a scientific background. That came from somebody, and look, and then of course what happened is government and the big corporates shut that voice down. Of course, she was spreading misinformation, but at the same time, that would have made people more angry. It would have created that feeling, look, we're being censored. Where is the freedom in being able to speak our opinion? Now, I think, so we really need to, it's an ongoing battle that we need to look at. How do we manage misinformation, and how do we then provide good information? And I think everybody here, from individual health practitioners for all the way through to governments and health legislators, haven't done a really good job. Look, I'm good friends with the doctor in my community, and he's a Western doctor. He's very open to what I have to say. His stance, I think, was rather aggressive. If you're not vaccinated, you can't come in to my practice. You can have a telephone consultation only. Now, he was thinking about also his client, his other patients as well, but I don't think that helps those people. I would have rather said, please come in, let's have a chat about this. Let's discuss why you are afraid of having a vaccination, for example. So you see, sometimes that attitude can just add fuel onto the fire.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. I don't think any vaccine hesitant person has ever really had their mind changed by that kind of paternalistic attitude.
Yeah. Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
or that lectury kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
No, that won't work.
Mm.
Yeah, that won't work. Look,
Mm-mm.
I recently did get upset because there has been so much misinformation. We've got and especially among like the indigenous community where the rates of vaccinations were a lot lower. And once again, the misinformation started and spread through the community in terms of what the governments were really, what is the government's real agenda. Now, the sad fact is that when we look at the statistics around the world, it's in those selective communities where the vaccination rates were lower that we see higher rates of death within those communities, especially with those within the community that are more vulnerable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the government coming down with a hard stick and just saying mandating the vaccine was probably not appropriate. I don't know, that more education needed to have been available to dispel a lot of the real, poor information that was available online.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Hindsight is 2020, isn't it? Well, on that note, I mean, I'm going to segue a little bit, Sal, because
Yes.
I'm wanting to be respectful of your time, and I can tell we've just got this tiny bit of time left, and there's so much I want to ask you. But in terms of if we, move a little bit from the pandemic to essential oil use, I'm sure you may have noticed this too, but at the beginning of the pandemic, I really noticed a lot of posts on social media, often by these multi-level marketing companies, not necessarily by the companies themselves, but by the many, many sales representatives and individual salespeople of these things, making some pretty bold claims about COVID and the capacity of essential oils to do things. Where do you stand with that?
A little bit of science can be quite dangerous. And a lot of look, I have essential oils have become my life. Out of aromatherapy I live and breathe it. And I am in awe and in so much admiration for what essential oils can do. Now, even in my early days, I would always talk about how amazing essential oils were at stimulating the immune system without giving much consideration or thought to, well, how do they stimulate the immune system, for example? And of course, essential oils do support the immune system in so many ways. And I think as more and more research is done into how we could put these oils into actual, a lot of the studies, unfortunately, probably are in vitro. And it's really easy to have some viruses, to have some bacteria in a petri dish, and to say, oh my God, look at how effective essential oils are. They are antibacterial, they're antiviral. But when it comes to those in vivo studies, that's where there still is a big gap. we are starting to understand, for example, so when we talk about, and I prefer to use the word that essential oils perhaps have immunomodulating effects, we know that they can support and increase phagocytic activity, for example. We know that they can have a good effect in suppressing cytokines. So therefore, from stimulating the immune system, they could also suppress the immune system in reducing inflammation in terms of also having anti-inflammatory effects as well. By reducing levels of stress, they obviously, that has a cascade effect where increased levels of inflammation, increased levels of cytokines in the body may lead to a more inflammatory condition, which makes the body more prone to getting ill. So do I say, oh my God, the terrain theory is a load of gobbledygooks? Of course I don't. The terrain theory is so important. And you do know, do you want to explain the terrain theory briefly? Yeah, but yeah, and I think we need that balance in understanding. Of course, it's because now we know, for example, the guts, and you as a nutritionist could tell us more about this. All our microbiota, how it affects our mental health, and our mental health does have a big impact on our immune system. So, you can't just I haven't used that word. You cannot dispel the terrain theory because it's all interconnected, isn't it?
It's not one or the other. It's
not one or the other. And it's both. So yeah, that will be one of my blogs that I want to write about very soon, about this. We can't just say, but Sal, you're just sitting on the fence on both sides. I said, no, this is how the body works. So yeah, look, so it was upsetting, and to think that tea tree, for example, or clove or cinnamon or various chemotypes of thyme are incredible, and as long as you take these oils, and more concerningly, some of the studies that are done involve essential oils being used internally by injection, often on lab animals.
Oh my gosh.
So we say, well, okay, then if you ingest the oil, it's the same thing. And this is where, once again, science is kind of doing its bit, researchers are doing their bit to better understand how essential oils work and how they activate, phagocytic activity, for example, or how they can suppress the immune system to help reduce inflammation or help to reduce oxidation in the body. But we can't translate those early studies into should I, if I ingest oils, it's going to have an incredible, effect on my well-being.
Yes, and unfortunately, that's something as a nutritionist that I've seen the downside effects of, microbiome disruption and just mucous membrane irritation or potential liver toxicity, with people just downing these oils on recommendation of their MLM,
of their well-being advisor.
Because
so be very careful, when you do, when I don't know who the listeners are, but if what I've always said is before you seek advice, professional advice, just seek the background, how the background of the person whom you are seeking professional advice from, to see that they have studied at a recognized college, a recognized institute. That is so important. Because now, it's quite. There was something that I wanted to say about essential oils, and and it was a comment that you just made, Cassie. And this is what, as much as I have so much admiration for essential oils, we have to realize, and this is why they can cause so much disruption, so many health issues, for example, when they're ingested, is because we're not using the whole plant. We are extracting the volatile oils from the plant. See, it's different when you take a herbal medicine preparation, whether it be in the dried form or whether it be in and usually an ethanol extract. It usually has the entire plant matter that has been macerated into or you take it as a tea, so you will get some volatile oils in the tea or in the ethanol extract of the herb, whereas essential oils are different. They are a very limited component. They are the oil that they are usually not water soluble components. They're certain, they are a very specific group of chemicals that are extracted from the plant. So that's why they tend to be like, there is people who put, whether they're ingested, whether they're applied topically, we've seen lots of reactions because I won't say that they're toxic, but they can cause skin sensitizations if they're not used wisely and you haven't sought the advice of a professional aromatherapist into how to use those essential oils.
Yeah, exactly. Gosh, that always makes me think of rosemary essential oil, which can be harmful to the liver, right? Even though whole rosemary plant
Yeah,
can actually be hepatoprotective, can protect the liver.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
really just goes to show, and this is the kind of information that I don't think many MLM essential oil representatives are going to be aware of.
Yeah, and look, I'd always found that there was like a very grey, it wasn't clearly black and white, and especially and this is how certain myths are created, and some myths may not necessarily, some stories that are perpetuated may not be correct, as you said with the rosemary for example. But what I found is that a lot of the early books on aromatherapy didn't really, they were talking about the herb in 1 minute, in one instance, and then they related those properties of the herb directly to the essential oil would have the same properties, and that's not exactly the case. And this is why essential oils do need to be used a little bit more cautiously. They're incredible things to work with, and in a certain respect, I feel as much as they are so active at a pharmacological level, I think their true potential lies in understanding how they work via the olfactory pathway. But that has to be another session that we will do in the future, which so I would look forward. But yeah, and hence acting on the olfactory pathway, how they act on our mental well-being. And this is kind of opening new doors because it's really new sciences. We didn't really understand until 10, 20 years ago, the mechanisms of olfaction. And now it's very exciting. Now, one of the biggest, will I call it side effects? Is that the right word? One of the ongoing problems from many people, and we don't know the statistics with Omicron. We believe that it's not the case with Omicron, but it's definitely the case with Delta and the earlier variants. What we call anosmia, a loss of smell. So once you recover from your infection, many people, the statistics are quite high. Many people, 1 in 4 people, 1 in 5 people, it varies, something like that, depending also on the age group, remain anosmic. And people don't realize until they've lost their sense of smell how important it is.
So crucial.
With your relationship with your food, the relationship with your family, the relationship with people. It affects so many things.
Yeah, wow. Gosh, you really bring up a good point there. And I work with a lot of people who are working very hard to rebuild their relationship with food. And that's another factor to consider. Without that sense of smell, which is obviously linked to your sense of taste, that can really complicate that relationship.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully you're doing, there's a lot of interesting work that's been going on in that way. And I'm sure you use that, Casey, in your practice, in terms of appreciating the textures of foods, appreciating the different temperature, and also it's interesting that there has been a smell training program that's been in place before COVID, by the way, to help people who who are suffering from anosmia, and it involves using essential oils, would you believe? And now the important thing is to be diligent with it. And what people find is that eventually from anosmia that you end up developing a condition where smells become distorted. You might drink a beautiful glass of red wine and it tastes worse than, I think, well, the exact words in a blog that I was referring to and that I wrote recently, it tastes worse than the sewage, for example. So your taste buds become totally distorted. But through the smell training, you can slowly recover the sense of smell, especially if the loss of smell was related to like a viral infection. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack there.
Yeah.
So thank you for talking about that. I think that's going to become more and more relevant as more people move through this, having this virus. But the very last question, I think I want to think about wrapping it up because I know our time's nearly out. But Sal, I'm going to circle back to earlier when you touched on this trend that we're seeing in the health and wellness worlds, where we're seeing the popularity of mystical and non-Western belief systems such as shamanism really grow, and whether that's someone smoke cleansing with Palo Santo at the start of a yoga class, or it's, a self-appointed shaman marketing their healing workshop. There's this increasing attempt to really commodify all these indigenous healing rites and use sacred medicinal plants. And you mentioned this as well, that closer to home, we've got that that more imperialist appropriation of Aboriginal culture. Can you talk about what your stance on what do you think can be done about this? Because it is a problem as far as I can see in this community.
I actually believe that understanding a more traditional, in the spiritual cosmologies, I think we have to be, first of all, respectful that shamanic practices around the world, it's not just like a health practice. It really is embedded within their spiritual practices. So you know what? We have to be mindful of that and respectful of that. We need to get permission to be able to. A lot of traditional healers and elders want to share their wisdom and knowledge, because I believe that unless we can understand, for example, for example, in Australia, the traditional Aboriginal cosmology, their connection with country, we will never appreciate the concept of global warming. And climate change. We will never have that respect for nature that has existed within these traditional practices. So we have to learn about these traditional practices, but we have to do it by being respectful. We have to also be very mindful that we just don't decide to commercialize it for our own personal gain. And I see this all the time. And I think you use that word. Well, of course, I've become an expert. I'm going to now market it as a workshop. I'm going to market it. Now, I've been talking about this, and I do workshops on this, but I'm trying to do workshops to help create this awareness of how we should be more respectful of these traditional spiritual practices. And I think through that, we can definitely, I think we will grow as an individual. Now, it's easy, and I referred to this. I have a whole section, first of all, in chapter 1 on re-shamanizing aromatherapy. And I have a section where I talk about indigenous rites and the cultural appropriation of shamanism, or the inappropriate cultural appropriation of shamanic practices from the world, around the world. And look, some people, like Tacey, he's written, and he actually, I want to share something with you that I've referred to in my book, because this is gorgeous. This is beautiful. Now, this comes from a book that I think was written about 20 years ago, and Greaves cites a senior lawman of the Narayingi people in the Western Kimberleys, and he's addressing a gathering of white people in his country. And this is how it goes. We are sorry for you people. We cry for you because you haven't got the meaning of culture in this country. We have a gift we want to give you. We keep getting blocked from giving you that gift. We get blocked by politics and politicians. We get blocked by the media, by the process of the law. All we want to do is come out from under all of this and give you this gift. And it is the gift of pattern thinking. It is the culture, which is the blood of this country, of Aboriginal peoples, of the ecology, and of the land itself. So we have to, and once we understand this connection that the true custodians of this country have had for millennia, we will never really get it. Yeah. And this applies. So this brings me to what the last thing is. Well, are we like Tacey, for example, David Tacey, he says, and in this book, that's the author I referred to before. He said, we cannot, as Westerners, tack on Aboriginal spirituality to our rational conscious, but must change our consciousness from within by burrowing down into our feared and walled-in unconscious to find an answering image to Aboriginal spirituality. Now this goes, you are a yoga practitioner, you explain. So the same thing goes with yoga, understanding that spiritual connection that it has and not turning it into a form of calisthenics, but appreciating it, appreciating that, well, maybe it's not, this cosmology maybe not for me, but maybe it is. And, the whole notion of yoga as well has a very, very interesting history and perhaps a bit of a dark history as well. And the connection of chakras, for example, being made of, like chakras being so common, and the understanding of chakras, and look, and it's a beautiful, it's a beautiful notion of the, understanding these energy centers. But when we look at that connection with the Theosophical Society and how they were then westernized, and to a certain extent, what the Theosophical Society did, it influenced a whole range of psychologists, to practice a more holistic form of psychology, which incorporates the spirit. And this is what Tacey does. And so from this, we see, psychologists incorporating, because Jung was fascinated. He was fascinated with these Eastern spiritual practices, but he also wanted to understand it. How can we integrate it to create a more holistic spirituality? And this is why Jung had his big falling out with Freud, because Freud was just focused on issues of the body, whereas Jung was more focused on issues of the mind and of the spirit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
So
yeah, of course. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah,
please.
This is almost another topic that I would love to share with you.
Oh, gosh. I feel like all these topics can be so, you have this way, Sal, of interweaving and seeing the whole picture and bringing it all together in a spiral that comes to this center. So yeah, we could talk about any one of these topics for hours and hours, but I think that for now we're going to have to call it a day, just because I know you said you had to go at this time. But just to finish,
Thank
with
you.
Sal, can you let the listeners know what you're currently working on at the moment and where they can find you?
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Cassie. So I've just finished, and it's been such a pleasure working on, and I feel frustrated and angry that I had not known about Julian of Norwich earlier. I only discovered her last year in the middle of the pandemic, and I've just had such wonderful feedback, people thanking me, because I related the teachings of Julian of Norwich, a female mystic from the 14th century who lived during the period of the bubonic plague, the Black Death, whatever you want to call it, for her entire life. And she had these interesting revelations. And she had an interesting way of, at that time, the church and people said, this is God punishing us for our sins. But she said, no, the God that we know is a loving God. He would not want to do this. And so her approach was very different. It was a much more holistic approach. We need to be respectful of nature, not angry with nature. And so her origins, even though it was deeply embedded in like a medieval, this is like pre-Reformation days. So it was like the Catholic Church had a very strong control of people. But here she was, a female, speaking out against the God that we look up to is not a vengeful God. God is within us. She had almost, as several other people have commented, a very a more Eastern philosophical approach, like a Buddhist approach. God is within us, for example, a non-dual, she broke down this nature and spirit. It is all one, integrated. And so I speak about that, but I also then looked at some of her teaching, not her teaching, but some of her words, some of her revelations, and where they give us strength, they give us hope, they encourage us to be in awe, they promote resilience. And so I said, well, each of these features is a different element of spirituality. And which essential oils are we in awe of? Which essential oils nurture compassion? Which essential oils inspire hope? Which essential oils help us to deal with the dark night of the soul? So yeah, that's what I've just been working on.
Wow.
I have been so feeling, not frustrated, it's not the right word, but I've been working on volume 2 because volume 1 is available.
Yes.
Volume 3, what did I do with my volume 3? Volume 3 is available, but volume 2 is missing. So I'm working currently on volume 2.
That's
But
excellent.
there is something that I can't do just one. Once you understand, and I'm working on another project which is looking at, initially I was just focused on personality types and I was using the Myers-Briggs type indicators, but now I've gone beyond just the Myers-Briggs, but looking at scent, the different essential oils of scent, and the various archetypes that they represent across all of humanity. And so I draw on all these different, so I'm working on that little project as working on volume 2. Yeah.
I love anything archetypal and working with those kind of constructs. So
maybe I will look forward to do it. Yeah, sharing with you.
Yes, please.
And if you can, and if I haven't had such terrible feedback, and if people don't say, Cassie, oh God, don't get Sal back on, but I'll be more than happy to come back on to your little podcast and actually, chat to you again. Because there's so much of it. It's been so exciting speaking to you, and I get so excited just listening to you and what you've had to say as well.
Oh, Sal, it's just been so wonderful. I would love to have you back on because I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. But thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom in such an excited and gentle and really encouraging, really energizing way. Actually, listening to makes me want to just go, oh, I got to read more about this Tacey guy and look at his books. And it just fuels that fire to continually learn and investigate and research and have that awe that you were talking about. So thank you for seeing the whole picture and for speaking with me today. I really appreciate it.
I hope, Cassie, that all your listeners, they're all not being too badly affected by the floods, because I know it's been so terrible from like all the way down the East Coast. It's just brought so much trauma and so much distraction.
Me too. Me
Yeah,
too.
so I
So
hope that
glad.
everybody is safe and that you're able to rebuild quickly if you've had homes that have been destroyed or damaged by the flood, businesses that have been destroyed. And it's really hard, isn't it? Because it just comes off two interesting, challenging years for many people. And it's like, and it started with the bushfire. We went straight into the COVID
Yep.
period and now these floods. And I
Oh
think, and
God.
this is why I look to, I find so much comfort in essential oils and that connection with Julian of Norwich. And by the way, I did a little webinar on this, so I would love to share it with your listeners. So
Please.
when you put sorry where when this becomes available,
Yeah.
Cassie will send you the link to my little webinar that I did on Julian of Norwich,
I will
because it is so
absolutely.
exciting to
Yeah.
learn about her.
Oh
Thank you
gosh.
so much, Cassie.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Sal.
And for
Thank you. Yeah, it's been
everyone.
wonderful.